My name is Dr. Samuel Green, and I've spent the last 15 years practicing medicine. Tonight, I want to share a story from my final days at Ravenwood Hospital, a story that defies explanation and haunts me still. As I counted down the nights until the end of my notice period, I encountered something beyond comprehension, something that still sends shivers down my spine. It all began on a quiet night, just past midnight. The hospital was a labyrinth of empty corridors and dimly lit wards. As I made my rounds through the ICU on the 4th floor, exhaustion clung to me like a shroud. That's when I saw her a silhouette at the far end of the hall, barely visible in the flickering light. She was a woman, or a specter of one. Her pallid skin hung loosely from her bones, and her eyes, sunken and devoid of life, bore into mine. A tattered hospital gown clung to her form, stained with a darkness that seemed to defy explanation. But it was her expression and eternal sadness etched upon her face that froze me in my tracks. I stood motionless, unable to comprehend what I was witnessing. Then, without warning, she let out a scream, a haunting cry that pierced the silence and chilled me to the core. In an instant, she vanished, leaving me shaken and questioning my sanity. The following night, I tried to dismiss the encounter as fatigue-induced hallucination. But as I entered the bathroom around 2 a.m., the air turned icy cold. The lights flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. Panic gripped me as the taps turned on by themselves, water cascading into the sink with an unnatural force. Before I could react, the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. Desperation fueled my pounding on the door, calling out for help that never came. In the mirror, her reflection materialized, a grotesque smile spreading across her face, devoid of sound but filled with malevolence. Her presence overwhelmed me, a silent scream echoing in my mind until the lights flickered back on, and she vanished once more. As each night passed, the encounters grew more intense. On the 3rd night, I was summoned to the operating room for an emergency procedure. The sterile environment offered no solace as the lights flickered ominously. Amidst the chaos of surgery, I felt her presence, a coldness that seeped into my bones. Monitors beeped erratically, instruments clattered to the floor, and my colleagues seemed oblivious to the looming figure that stood at the edge of my vision. Her eyes bore into mine with a hatred beyond comprehension, and a wave of suffocating dread washed over me. I could almost feel her icy touch as she reached out, her form flickering in and out of existence until I could bear it no longer. By the 4th night, sleep had become a fleeting memory, replaced by a paralyzing fear of what awaited me in the shadows. The hospital, once a place of healing, had transformed into a labyrinth of nightmares. As I navigated the empty corridors, her presence lingered like a shadow at my heels. Each corner turned revealed her form, a spectral figure, drenched in water and pain. She moved with an unnatural grace, her eyes fixed upon mine as if pleading for release from an eternity of torment. With every step, her whispers grew louder, an incomprehensible lament that echoed through the darkness. I ran, desperate to escape the specter that haunted me, but she was always there, a step behind, her cold breath upon my neck. I sought refuge in the isolation ward, a sanctuary from the terrors that prowled the hospital halls. But solitude offered no respite as her presence invaded my sanctuary. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows upon the walls, and the air grew thick with a suffocating dread. She materialized before me, a phantom of despair, her form flickering in and out of existence. Her eyes bore into mine with an intensity that threatened to consume me, and a vile substance oozed from her lips, staining the floor with a darkness that defied reason. I screamed, my voice echoing through the empty ward, but my cries fell upon deaf ears. She drew closer, her touch like ice upon my skin, and I recoiled in horror as her whispers filled my mind with images of suffering and despair. In a moment of desperation, I sought refuge in the morgue, a place where the dead lay silent and still. But even in death, she found me. The cold air hung heavy with the stench of decay, and the silence was shattered by the rattling of storage unit doors. One by one, the lids slid open, revealing the grotesque figures within. Among them stood the spectre, a ghastly visage of decay and despair. She moved with purpose, her eyes fixed upon mine as she reached out with icy fingers that brushed against my cheek. Her touch burned like fire, searing through flesh and bone, and her voice, a raspy whisper of torment, echoed through the darkness. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling with the realization that there was no escape from the horrors that haunted me. As the final night of my notice period approached, dread consumed me like a torrential wave. The hospital, once a place of healing, had become my personal purgatory, a prison from which there was no escape. She was everywhere, her presence looming in every shadow, every flickering light. With each passing hour, her whispers grew louder, a symphony of sorrow and suffering that echoed through the corridors. In the pre-dawn hours, I found myself in the staff lounge, a last refuge from the horrors that pursued me. But even here, she found me, her form materializing in the corner of the room. She moved closer, her eyes filled with an unspoken torment, and her fingers brushed against my face with a touch that froze my blood. A flood of memories washed over me, images of her pain, her anguish, and her final moments in the hospital. I saw her desperation, her longing for release from the torment that bound her to this earthly realm. And in that moment, I understood. With the first light of dawn, her form began to fade, a spectral apparition retreating into the shadows from whence it came. I left the hospital that morning, my spirit battered and broken, but alive. Yet, the memory of her lingers, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurks within the halls of Ravenwood Hospital. I share this story not for pity or sympathy, but as a warning to those who dare to tread where the veil between the living and the dead grows thin. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment below. Stay safe, and until next time, sweet dreams, or should I say, nightmares.